where there's no trees, everything's been stumped, there's no cover for animals. So it is a very big problem, but it's something we can fix if we were to increase the supply of electricity, something that British aid and American aid could focus on more closely.
You talked a bit about the charcoal. It's not really something that we have much to do with here. Are there laws around the trading of charcoal?
Yes, it's banned in Malawi, in Zambia, in many countries, but you will drive down a street in Blantyre, the biggest city in Malawi, named for David Livingstone's birthplace. He's still a hero in much of Africa because he drove the slave traders, the Arab slave traders, out of Africa. But in Blantyre, the city in Malawi, although the charcoal trade is banned, there's lines of charcoal sellers down the street. The police buy charcoal because they haven't got electricity at home. It's very hard to stop it. What makes charcoal so popular is the 20% effect. If you take a kilogram of wood and you turn it into charcoal, it burns down to 200 grams. So it weighs 1/5. And so as a result, somebody who doesn't have a car, who perhaps has got a cart, a horse-drawn cart, maybe even a bicycle, can strap half a tree onto a bicycle. You can't ride the bicycle, but or into a cart and take it into the market to sell because you've reduced it in weight and mass. It sets fire much more quickly than wood. It reaches a high temperature much faster than wood. It burns hotter than wood. We couldn't have had the Royal Navy during the Tudor era without charcoal, because and coal, of course, because we couldn't smelt metal. And charcoal is therefore very popular. How do you eradicate it in a country where there's no alternative power supply? This is the problem, trying to fix that deficit of electricity.
So it's not the corporations going in there chopping down all these trees, it's that people who live there need to cook and they need to keep warm, and they will go out and chop trees down because that's the culture.
It's not just culture, it's a necessity, of course. It's what people in Britain used to do 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago. There is commercial deforestation that happens, but it's rare. There's logging in the Congo with firms that come in and take out large areas of forest. The Congo River Valley is the world's second lung, the Amazon being the first. It's the world's second largest area of rainforest. And it's falling very fast, mostly because of firewood. And people just don't have an alternative. You've got countries like Burkina Faso where about 8%, that's 8% of people are on the grid. We're used to in rich countries or well-off countries, middle-income countries, just turning on a light and it's there. These are people who don't even have wires connected to their homes. And so until we're able to do something about that, we can't stop the trees from falling. And that's why I said, I'm not a denier of climate change. What I'm saying is that the falling forest is not a consequence of climate change.
5 years in prison. Mayors from a conference of mayors. Some of their goals include coordinating a national strategy to combat the crisis and sharing successful practices. The mayors toured the city's infamous Skid Row to see the magnitude of the crisis. They also visited an area where repurposed shipping containers now provide temporary housing for unsheltered residents.
Apple will pay. It's a violation of a federal law that bars discrimination based on citizenship. It didn't specify which Apple jobs were affected by the recruitment procedures.
The DOJ said the settlement is its largest ever involving such discrimination. Apple will pay nearly $6.8 million in civil penalties. About $18 million will go to an unspecified number of affected workers.
Apple will be. The U.S. Embassy said Paraguay has successfully completed the review.
The new regulations make Paraguay one of 18 countries permitted to export beef products to the U.S. The U.S. Embassy in Paraguay also praised the high quality of Paraguayan beef and Paraguay's food safety and animal health systems. The new rules take effect December 14th.
Journalist, TV broadcaster, and radio host Steve Gruber. Steve, thanks for being here.
I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time and calling.
So, Steve, how widespread is this problem of hospitals closing down in the U.S.?
Well, it's pretty stunning, really. When I started digging into this, I didn't know much about it. I had gotten a conversation with the local president of a hospital in southern Michigan, a hospital that has just under 100 beds. He said, a couple of hundred have closed, 600 in financial despair right now. I didn't know that, Josh, so I started looking into it. He was right. Over the last 15 years, about 200 hospitals in America have closed. Today, as we sit here and talk, more than 600 are in financial distress, and 200 of those could close today, and nobody would be surprised except the people that use the hospital or have a job there, because it usually comes as a big cold slap of reality when it happens.
So, I mean, what's causing it? It's been going on for 15 years. I mean, is it a new problem? It's an old problem? What did you find with that?
It's a combination of things, Josh. It's not one cause, but there are some things that you can look at and say this is a problem. For example, reimbursement comes from CMS, federal government. That's the name of the agency that reimburses hospitals and healthcare agencies and ambulance services when somebody comes in that can't pay their bill. And people come in, of course, we know they use the emergency room for primary healthcare. Not great for them, not great for the system. So what happened in the 1980s and 90s, reimbursement rates were pretty high, pretty decent. They've been getting smaller ever since, and more hard to get back ever since, according to everybody we talked to in this documentary. For example, in the 80s and 90s, they said, reimbursement rates were reasonable. We could survive on those. And it usually took 2 or 3 weeks to get them back. Today, it takes months, maybe a year to get back those reimbursements, which are sometimes minuscule. Now, during the course of this documentary, we went 3 places. Massillon, Ohio, it's a city of about 300,000, just kind of southeast of Cleveland. It had 2 hospitals that went closed in the last 10 years. Kennett, Missouri, in the Boot Heel, straight north of Memphis, Tennessee, to give you some reference. It has a town of about 10 or 12,000, lost their hospital 5 years ago. And then Ducktown, Tennessee, in the Copper Basin, as they call it, a town of about 1,000. But that was a hospital that serves several rural counties, and it went out of business as well. So what happens is people lose access to health care. And when do you think about a hospital, honestly? If you don't need it, you don't work there, you don't think about it. Just there, it's kind of something in the back of your mind. Until the moment comes that you need that hospital for an emergency, to deliver a baby, whatever the case may be, then you know the hospital is important to you. And that's why they go away, they go dark, and people drive by and go, oh, the hospital's gone. Most people don't even realize there was a problem to begin with.
Yeah. I've encountered some of this personally. I remember one time there was a homeless guy, and he said he wasn't feeling well. He asked for a drive to the hospital, and a group of friends took him to the hospital. I found out later that they do this all the time. They'll have people call an ambulance for them. They get a free meal, a free bed. And, of course, it costs the hospital, and it costs them for the ambulance. But I found out illegal aliens, they do the same thing. They're not on the books. They go there, they get free health care, and we have to, taxpayers foot the bill. But what you're saying is that the government is not properly reimbursing that? I mean, it comes from taxpayers in general. It's crazy.
Let me give you an example. Ducktown, Tennessee, the hospital there, the Copper Basin Medical Center, went out of business about 2018. Again, it was a small hospital, but it served a pretty big piece of real estate. Some smaller rural counties, a few thousand in this county, a few thousand in that county. The reimbursement rate for Ducktown up until 2018, if an indigent person walked through the emergency room doors and could not pay, the initial fee was $15. That was the reimbursement rate from the government. And the mayor of that town laughed. He said, for $15, we couldn't hire a nurse for 15 minutes. And he's right. So you go back to the 1980s and 90s, the reimbursement rates were decent, not too hard to get. Now you go to some of these hospitals. We talked to the former chief executive officer of the hospital in Kennett, Missouri, and she explains to us in great detail that you go back to the 80s and 90s, it was easy. Now these hospitals have complete departments, bodies in chairs, complete departments just trying to get the money back from the federal government. It takes 6 months, 8 months, a year. So they're dedicating resources for people to fiddle around with computers and spend their entire day, groups of people, just to get reimbursed from the federal government, and those reimbursements are so small, it's a path to bankruptcy, to insolvency, because they're so small, you can't survive on it, and yet the government also requires you to take people. So you've got government problems. You've also got corporations that will come in and buy a group of hospitals and say, well, this one's not performing as well. And that's what happened in Kennett, Missouri, for example. They bought some hospitals, decided that hospital, even though it was in the black, profiting $5 million the year before it was shut down, it pulled the plug anyway. Then you've got the insurance companies. They have their own challenges for the healthcare system. So bad governance, corporate greed, insurance issues. There's a variety of problems out there.
Jeez, well, Steve, thank you again for